I'm gonna share with you the truth that nobody has told you about reaching 2000 ELO in chess. I play chess for 20 years. I am a professional chess coach for 10 years now, and I have helped so many people to get to that level. I have got to 2400 ELO myself, and I'm an international master right now, but it wasn't like that for a long time. And what helped me so much is exactly this thinking system that I'm gonna share with you today in this game. I'm gonna explain all of my decisions, and I'm gonna share with you the entire system of what you need to focus on during a chess game. Okay, so I'm playing as white here, and the first mistake so many people are making, huge mistake. They focus too much on the opening theory. They are looking for YouTube videos that are gonna somehow magically help them because they learn this opening trap that they can execute and beat everyone. This is just not the right approach to chess, not the approach to genuinely achieve that level, become top 1% of chess players, which is 2000 ELO in chess. Instead, I want you to focus on understanding, if you are talking about openings, on understanding openings, understanding the ideas that you should execute in the opening you play, whichever opening that is. I like, for example, this double fianchetto system against the King's Indian. This is my favorite line. I have played it against Fabiano Caruana and got a fantastic position, and it was equal until the end of the day, move 80. I have beat so many tough guys using exactly this system, but it doesn't matter. You can choose whatever opening that you like, that fits your style, that gives you good results. I want you to focus more on understanding the key chess principles, because that would bring you to the desired goal, to achieving that 2000 ELO mark so much faster than trying to memorize every single opening line. And this is just the first mistake that so many of the people trying to get to that level are making. The second mistake that I notice pretty much all of my students are making, and that hugely stops them from achieving that goal, is they are playing chess as if they are completely alone. They are like, okay, I have this plan, that's what I want to do, and blah, blah, blah. That is good. I mean, you have to think strategically in chess. This is what this game has been invented for. But at the same time, you have to remember, you play against a real opponent here. And he also has some ideas in mind. He wants to achieve something. And you can never ignore that. For example, my opponent plays here e5 and he is putting some pressure on the center. I have to think, what are the implications of that? What's going to happen if I just ignore this threat, whether it's a threat, whether it's dangerous for me in the first place? Well, because I understand this opening pretty good, I have played so many games, and that is why I advocate, especially if you're under 2000, instead of playing so many different stuff and try to remember that, play just one opening. At least in Blitz and Rapid, it's always enough until your opponent specifically prepares against you. Then maybe you need to be more flexible. But until that, just play one opening against everything. Just understand how it works. What are the main ideas there? So thanks to the fact that I have gathered here a lot of experience, I know that whenever they play e5, I rather want to take it because I want to improve my bishop here. I want it to be very active, and his bishop would be pretty passive defending that pawn. But still, essential is whenever you make a move, try to think what the opponent can do, and always try to be as active as possible. This is the best strategy, first of all, to learn in chess, and second, to reach 2000 ELO. You want to put as much pressure on your opponent as possible. That starts basically from move number one. If you play d4, you already put some pressure because you control some important central squares. If instead you play a move like, I don't know, g3 or g4, you don't fight for the center. It's much simpler for the opponent to deal with it and to find a reasonable response. And of course, it applies even more as you go through the game. In the middle game, for example, the best strategy would be combining, doing something useful for yourself and acknowledging your opponent's threats and dealing with it. If you can combine in just one move, stopping your opponent's idea and creating an idea of your own, that would be the best thing you can do. All right. So my opponent is thinking for such a long time here, he doesn't know whether to take with the pawn or with the knight, or maybe also about knight g4, interesting opportunity there. In every case, I just wanted to continue my development here. No fancy move. I mean, to get to 2000 ELO, you don't need to invent those 10 moves combinations, stuff like that. Of course, once you do find some sacrifice, it's always nice to try it, as long as it follows your goal. In the middle game, for example, you should only make the moves that are helping you achieve your strategic idea, or that are stopping your opponent from executing his strategic idea. You don't make any other moves. It's basically just waste of time. Now, how do I understand what is your strategic idea? This is the question I get so often from my students, from my viewers, and I want to help you with that. You have to look at two things. You have to look at the strengths of your position and how you can utilize that to your advantage. Which pieces are specifically active and you can use them to create some threats. You remember, your strategy is always to put as much pressure on your opponent as possible. And then you look how you can do that. What are the weaknesses in your opponent's camp? Some pawns, some squares, some pieces that are potentially vulnerable, and you can create some problems against him. For example, here it might be this pawn on e5. That is why my opponent, he's very smart. I mean, he is in the top 1% of all of the chess players. He has already achieved that magic number of 2000. So he understands that he has to think about his opponent's plan, and he thought my plan here is to put pressure on that pawn, which, yeah, was reasonable and possible with the move knight c4. So now he protects against that threat, and after knight to c4, he can immediately play b5 and stop my activity there. My knight will need to go somewhere backwards. That is why I can do the same. I can play a4 right now and stop his idea from being implemented. I play a4 and control that b5 square. So that is how you play in terms of trying to understand your opponent's plan and at the same time doing something useful for yourself, because this a4 move helps me a lot. I want to play knight c4, and that was a problem before because he would play b5 immediately. Now it's not that simple. And I also utilize the moment that he has played knight f8, so he has less defenders for this e5 square, which means that my move came with the tempo. He plays bishop g4. Again, he's actively trying to stop my threat, which I like. What I don't like, or at least, I mean, for me, it's a beautiful thing, maybe he doesn't care about that I can play now the move h3. I'm simply attacking that bishop, nothing fancy, one move threat, but I want to force him to exchange this bishop. And it seems like he has no problems with that. He does it voluntarily. But I like playing with two bishops. I mean, I consider it to be a huge advantage, especially if I have potential to open up the position. I'm gonna take here with the queen, because who knows, maybe I'm gonna relocate my queen to a better position, and eventually something like f4 would be possible to open up the position. Again, if you have two bishops, you want to open up the position. Why? Because in this case, your bishops would be much more powerful. For now, it's okay. I mean, I put a lot of pressure here. Yes, I can play queen c3 to attack him even more, but generally it's not a nice idea to put your queen against your opponent's bishop on the same diagonal. So instead, I of course want to bring every single one of my pieces into the game, to invite everybody to the party. This is one of the main goals of the opening, and essential because you want to prepare for the battle. The point of the opening is to get ready for the actual fight against your opponent. And the more pieces you have, the more opportunities you have. But it's important to find the right square, the right potential for every single one of your pieces. You don't want to just make any random move and say, well, I have developed my pieces, I have achieved the goal. No, you actually want to have a very useful function to every single one of your pieces. So back to the question of the strategical plan. In this game, in this middle game, my plan is to put pressure on this pawn. Now, as I have got, like the first phase was here when I played knight c4, even here when I played a4, I made this knight c4 move possible. My whole strategic idea is around this pawn on e5, creating as many threats as possible. Then with every single move my opponent made, he tried to stop me, right, from taking this pawn. Then I played h3 to again get rid of this pin. And now I have got two bishops advantage, so that I still put pressure on this pawn, but my strategy, of course, as the situation changes on the chessboard, your strategy also changes, because now as I have two bishops, I should be looking for ways to somehow open up the position. And that becomes my strategic idea, so that it's more difficult for my opponent to deal with my bishops. Because this is my strength. Remember, you have to use your strengths. And the way you use your strengths in the form of two bishops, you open up the position. That's what I'm aiming for. Now I'm taking the pawn because my opponent has created a threat. Remember, whenever your opponent creates a threat, makes a move basically, you have to stop thinking about all of your plans and think what is the idea behind that move, what kind of a threat my opponent created. In this case, it's obvious. Some other times it wouldn't be that obvious at all, but you still have to think about that. And also, you have to think maybe it's not the only threat, because yes, this one is obvious, but he has created another threat, attacking this pawn on c2 with his queen when my knight is going somewhere. So I have to ideally deal with both of those threats. And the way to do that would be to play knight e3. This move deals with this threat. This move deals with this threat because the pawn is protected. And at the same time, it creates an idea of my own, potentially to play knight d5, which would help me to get even more space, create threats for my opponent, and open up the position, which is my ultimate goal. So this is a perfect example of so-called multi-purpose move. This is the type of moves that are the best in chess, and if you want to get to 2000 ELO, you have to make as many of those moves as possible. You do something useful for yourself, or maybe even multiple useful things for yourself, and at the same time you stop your opponent's ideas. The more moves like that you make, the more chances you're gonna get in chess. Okay, so now, again, I think first of all what kind of ideas my opponent has. Maybe knight d4 is on his agenda, and yeah, it's like I have more attackers for now, but maybe he's thinking about sacrificing a pawn to get some activity afterwards. Who knows? So I have two ideas in mind. I have queen e2, which would improve my queen's position. It looks clumsy there on f3, and it's gonna create a threat in terms of this b5 pawn, and it's gonna protect my c2 pawn, so I'm more ready for knight d5. Or I go for the most active approach and I play knight d5 immediately. How do you decide which one is better? Well, you simply calculate the variations. In the best case scenario, you calculate at least 3 moves ahead, or until there are no active opportunities both for you and your opponent. What kind of active opportunities? Checks, captures, and threats. CCT system. So knight d5 is easier to calculate. It's a double threat. I think he pretty much has to take, otherwise he has to go here back, which is very passive, and I can at least take that pawn. So he has to take. I want to check this variation. Then my pawn is hanging, so you have to remember what changes in the position. My knight was protecting, it's not protecting anymore. I thought I can take with the pawn still, and then attack that knight, so that when he takes, I take his knight, and I create a threat here, that would be winning. But I think the problem is, once I exchange that, he plays knight to d4. And even though I'm still a pawn up, I don't like it because he gets a lot of activity. If I play queen e2, I create a threat here, I prepare the move knight d5 because I'm going to be ready to take with the pawn afterwards, and I'm not scared of anything. But at the same time, I protect this pawn. So I like this move, and I have to check knight to d4, but I think it's no problem because I can just take it twice, and even though I lose my bishop's advantage, but I kind of transform it into a different type of advantage, an extra pawn. It's one of the advantages of having two bishops pair, because you can always exchange one bishop against the knight, and you can do it in a situation where it really benefits you. For example, by winning a pawn. Yeah, this knight to d4 idea is pretty good for my opponent, pretty annoying, so I don't want him to do it in a very good circumstances. If he sacrifices a pawn to achieve that, then yeah, I'm okay. Because I might have some ideas like f4 and d5 afterwards, which would shut down his bishop and make my bishop very active. This is like a dream, basically. If I play knight d5 myself, I have to be a little bit careful, because the same variation is still... Okay, in this case it would be actually cool, because at the end of the day, his rook, the more vulnerable pieces you have, the more difficult it is for you, the higher the chances that you are gonna blunder something. And yeah, this is a mistake that so many players under 2000 ELO are making. They are not careful enough. A lot of their pieces are hanging, are vulnerable, and then at some point inevitably they get a problem with it. Okay, so let's calculate that. 95, still I think they have to take, otherwise this pawn is hanging. I mean, my knight is beautiful on d5. The only problem can be if they take, I take it back. Remember, that helps me because it achieves my strategic idea of opening up the position, and at the same time, it achieves the strategic idea of attacking that pawn because my queen would be attacking it as well. And the only active move they have is 94, but it's not possible. I just take it and the rook is hanging, so they cannot take it back. Which means that 95 is a great move because it creates a lot of threats and it achieves my strategic goal. Okay, I mean, I have a choice here. I can also take with the pawn, with the rook, sorry, which would make my rook active, but in this case, 94 becomes active, becomes possible. So again, you always think about your opponent's opportunities. You never pretend like you are alone on this board and focus only on your plans. This is the #1 reason that stops people from getting to 2000 ELO, and I want you to never ever do that. Never make your move unless you have thought what your opponent can do in response. And you see, my opponent is in trouble here because he realizes that is not possible. But if he plays anything else, then my bishops are so beautiful. Remember, I have told you that opening up the center would be so great for me as I have those two bishops. Well, guess what? I have played all of my moves trying to achieve that goal. And now I'm more or less, I mean, those pawns are still there, but there is potential to open up the center even more. I think I would even play d6 because that would make this guy even stronger. That would stop my opponent from blocking my pawn. Yes, I mean, it can be dangerous in some variations. This pawn might be lost, but I think I'm gonna achieve a lot in the process. I'm gonna activate so many of my pieces, create so many of my threats. So even if I do lose that pawn, I wouldn't care that much. Maybe the drawback is that this knight can go back to e6, but on the other hand, I mean, that would make this pawn even more vulnerable. For example, I think about the move rook d5. That achieves a lot of goals. It attacks the knight on c5 and the pawn on e5. Remember, the more pressure you put on your opponent, the more threats you create for him. This is the best strategy under 2000 ELO. The more difficult it is for him or her to deal with it and to still find a way to continue the game. And so you increase your chances to win. And why I also say that this is the best strategy to learn, to become stronger at chess. Because if you are staying passively like that in box, if you are just waiting for your opponent to come and destroy you, you're not learning anything new. Instead, if you're going forward, yes, there is a potential to like blunder something or miss something and you're going to lose a game. But in the process, you're going to learn so much. And next time, you are still attacking, you are still in this mode of destroying your opponent. But this time you do it better, you do it considering your opponent's opportunities in the process. You reduce the chances that you're going to blunder. And with the time, you become stronger and stronger. I like this move c4. So first of all, of course, we need to think about the most active opportunities, but I don't like it because there would be a huge pin against my queen, and for example, f6 seems like I'm losing a piece. But if I can combine, like I have a huge pawn here on d6, a passer, but if I can add another one, this is even better, and I don't see anything stopping me. Knight d6 might have been an idea, but I also protect tactically against it because I'm going to play c5 and basically win a knight. So again, the c4 move is a double purpose move. It is very active for me, it helps me to achieve my goal, and it stops my opponent's idea. Because if this knight cannot take on d6, otherwise it's just so miserable here on b7, and frankly, I think he should have played knight to e6 instead. At least to have this knight in the center, at least to create some ideas, maybe play knight d4. Although, yeah, again, I was about to take that pawn on e5. Well, at least that would give him some activity. So I do think that was a better chance. I mean, I can take with the queen, but I don't see a reason why would I do that. I like creating this pair of pawns, even though the pawns are equal, like the material is completely equal here. I do have a huge advantage because I have those connected passers and he doesn't have any passers here. In fact, this pawn is a weakness. And this is a passer, but it's only one isolated one. And it's so difficult for him to make use of it. It's backwards pawn. I mean, you have to waste a lot of time to even create a threat. Even if you put it to a4, you still don't create any threat. So this is much less dangerous than those pawns. Okay, now he realizes his knight is doing nothing on b7, so he tries to improve it. But I don't think there is something stopping me from continuing my plan, because again, I do something useful for myself. I improve my position a lot. Now this d6 pawn is never in danger, but at the same time, I'm creating a threat of taking that guy on a6. He did protect it against it tactically. Again, you never ever make your move unless you have thought what your opponent can do in response. He wants to make this fork. By the way, even that I'm not sure is so bad for me, because I'm gonna have so beautiful bishops and so beautiful pawns. Like queen takes, knight to b4, queen goes somewhere like b6, let's say, or c4 maybe. It takes, I take it back, let's say with the queen, I play c6 next move. This seems to be very scary for him. At the same time, maybe I don't need to sacrifice if my position is great anyway. Then the question is, how do I improve? Maybe I just remove my rook for now, so that my bishop is opened and I'm ready for something like queen to e4. Although maybe he finally wants to play knight d4. Let me think. Well, then I'm ready to take that pawn, right? So it's fine. And also I secure my back rank, which is always very useful, so that my opponent has less attacking potential. I don't know, the alternative was rook to d2. Maybe that also deserves attention, because then my bishop would be protected. In some variations, it might be relevant. But yeah, in general, I think I have achieved my strategic goal perfectly. I'm opening up the position here, and I have those beautiful, beautiful pawns. So you see that it's very, very good if you have one strategic idea, but it can transform throughout the game based on what's happening. But it's still very, very good to have one idea and follow it, instead of making one move here, one move there, so that your game is not consistent, and that helps your opponent a lot. And yeah, you're not going to achieve 2000 ELO if your chess game is not consistent. I'm thinking I can still grab this pawn, because I have thought about my opponent's idea. Yes, there is this pin, but I have this queen b2 that always and always helps. And if that's not enough, I also have bishop takes e6, which is attacking the queen. So I'm pretty sure I can take that. Like queen e6, for example, I always have queen to b2. And if he goes away with the king, well, the simplest thing is just play queen f3 and stop that pin from existing, basically, or just queen c2, something like that. Or queen c4, like I have so many different ways. Okay, he grabs. I haven't even noticed, by the way. Maybe I should have, but this pawn, I think it's so irrelevant in terms of this game. I mean, the only case it could be dangerous if he creates some discover checks here, some problems for me. But I do think it's basically winning now. Like d7, how do you even stop it? I like this strategy of creating as much pressure on the opponent, and that's what I'm executing in this game. Yes, I could have played queen to b2 check and blah blah blah, but that move is even more powerful, because I add even more attackers into my game, into putting pressure on my opponent, and he resigns. 97% accuracy. This is my result in this game using this simple thinking system that I have just shared with you. And if you want to get to 2000 ELO so much faster than you have ever imagined, consider to subscribe to my weekly live lessons. For the cheapest price possible, you can get it if you subscribe right now. It's very affordable, and you get direct personalized feedback from me every single week, so you can work on what really matters to you on your level and get to your goals so much faster. The link is in the description. You can find out more details about the academy, and of course, subscribe to it. I will be very happy to see you there.